very, very, very best. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. Okay. Are you able to see the screen? Angela, can you please see the screen so that I can start?
We can see the screen.
Okay, all right, okay. So this morning, I believe we've already discussed it, but I'm here to talk about the role of civil society in addressing privacy rights. Of course, it's no doubt that civil society plays a very significant role today and also on our continent. And what I'll seek to do is to demonstrate how this can be done in a way that can bring value to the, privacy and data protection ecosystem in Uganda. So generally, the data protection and privacy ecosystem, I have divided them into like two players. I like to look at those I call the state actors and the non-state actors. The state actors are usually the policymakers, so we know the government departments or ministries that usually define policies and then also facilitate the development of laws. We know the lawmakers that are made up of members of parliament, sometimes also the policymakers that enable the development of particular laws for the sector, and then regulators such as yourselves that are required by law usually to implement the laws that has been passed. And then also by extension, law enforcement. Sometimes law enforcement are broad, so it would include areas like the courts and the police, especially when it comes to the state actors. When it comes to the courts, we know that they play a critical role in the enforcement of the laws that have been passed, in ensuring that everybody is obeying or respecting the rights that have been guaranteed under the laws. And where there are violations, usually they also come in meting out the necessary punishments. We also know how the police force and institutions such as the Attorney General's office will be key to prosecution, especially in laws such as yours that also have not just administrative functions, but also criminal sanctions, which can only be enforced by bringing out appropriate actions, usually through the Attorney General's office, the police, and also with the courts. Then the regulators somehow play a part of what we also call law enforcement, because there are, in some jurisdictions, there are certain rights that they have. And some of these rights include power of enforcement, administrative sanctions, issuing out of administrative fines, and then ordering entities to refrain from performing or to perform certain acts that are required of them under the law. So these are the four main state actors when it comes to the data protection ecosystem. Then we have the non-state actors, and the non-state actors are usually made up of what we call the continental and regional bodies. In Africa, we can talk about the East African community, we can talk about SADC, we can talk about ECOWAS, and then the Northern African regional bodies as well. And then we have the African Union, which is also a continental body. Interestingly, most of these non-state actors in the continental region have also some form of either law or framework or guideline around data protection. And they also bring some kind of influence into the space, either by providing standard laws that should be passed, or providing directives to guide their members, or providing standard laws for purposes of harmonizations, as we see with the African Convention on Cybersecurity and Data Protection. Then we have the developmental partners and donors that would include organizations like the World Bank, like the United Nations agencies, and many others. And usually these developmental partners are normally partnering with governments and sometimes even other non-state and state actors in the region to promote and influence the data protection space. We're seeing a lot of activities, especially from organizations like the World Bank, the ITU, that are playing very significant roles in Africa on the adoption of laws like data protection as well, and not to forget the European Union as well. Then, of course, we also see academia, and academia is a very important non-state actor. Usually, they push a lot of research around the area and then look at practices and processes that can enable the development of the ecosystem as well. And so academia also forms a big part of the non-state actors. Then we have the media, as we call them, the third force. And the media, we know, plays a very strong role in most of our societies in giving awareness and then also calling to order, structures and systems that have to be compliant with the law, and then, for emphasis, I'll talk in more detail about the civil society organizations, but we have what we call the civil society organizations as well as the citizens. And these 6, key agencies are what I call non-state actors, and they all have very unique and critically important role to play in the data protection ecosystem. But for this morning, let me just focus on civil society organizations. So typically when we talk about civil society organizations, as I've already mentioned, they are non-state actors. They are usually bodies that are not affiliated with the government in any way. Normally, they are set up for profit, or they are not for profit, which means that their focus, even if the end income, is in developing their shared agenda and goal for which the organization has been set up. They normally advance shared goals and interests, what we call shared societal goals. So typically you would find civil society organizations looking at a particular cause, whether it's privacy or data protection, whether it's digital rights, whether it's elimination of poverty, whether it's agricultural needs. They normally have a particular focus or sector that they are looking at, and their broad objective, usually, which is what I call neutral or non-biased, is to look at the provision and of these of needs of these sectors in a way that really helps growth and development in our societies. The significant thing that you need to note about civil society organizations also is that they could be both local and international. And I'll share a bit more example as I go in depth about who comprises civil society organizations. And so typically civil society is made up of organizations such as myself, the Africa Digital Rights Hub, which is what we call the non-governmental organizations or agencies. These are not affiliated with government organizations that have been set up by an individual or a group of persons with the objective of promoting a particular interest. And in this case, we'll talk about their role when it comes to privacy rights and data protection more broadly. You sometimes also find community groups groups, which will be a group of small people within a particular community or sector that are interested in promoting certain rights, and so come together to push or request, the necessary players in that space to ensure the promotion of those rights within that community. We also have the labor unions, which I believe you all know. There are charitable organizations that are set up purposely to support society in the area of providing charitable causes and enabling. Notable among these societies that normally help with poverty alleviation and the like. And then we have our faith-based organizations or religious bodies that we also know, churches, mosques, and many other religious or faith-based organizations. Usually these organizations also form part of civil society, and they also help promote some form of agenda based on what the faith or religious outlook is for society. Then we have the professional associations. The professional associations, we know it could be association like the bar, association of lawyers, association of bankers, association of ICT professionals, and they all have particular interest, and normally these associations are formed to promote particular interest, and they come together to promote that agenda and objective that they normally have. Then we have foundations that are normally set up for particular cause, and then indigenous groups as well that come together to promote their interests. So when we talk about civil society organizations, you can see that it's a broad spectrum of organizations, and I believe it goes beyond these 8 that I've put here, but this is just to give us an idea of who are we talking about when we're talking about how civil societies can help and promote rights. Now, there's a reason why civil society is extremely important to the data protection and privacy ecosystem, and especially important when it comes to the promotion and enforcement of privacy rights as well. Now, civil societies, as I have mentioned, have the power to influence. So usually because they have the ability to bring together a number of people with a shared interest and focus, they are in a very critical position, or a very strong position, to influence power and authority to do the right thing. So normally civil society can influence either private sector to change or look at practices that can enable the development of their broader objective. They can look at influencing governments either to change laws or put in place structures and systems that can enable them achieve broader objectives. Usually these objectives are more for societal growth and development, as I have mentioned. They usually also have enormous convening power. And in some respects, civil society has been, named as the 3rd sector of influence in any society. So they are able to bring together very powerful people to advocate their causes as well. And this gives them a lot of convening power. Normally as well, because they are trusted as a neutral, because most civil society organizations are set up, as I mentioned, for not-for-profit, and their agenda is not to make money. Their agenda is not to hold on power. Their agenda is to change society for good. And so because of these, usually they have the trust of, interestingly, almost all the stakeholders that I've mentioned before, both from the state and non-state actors, because they wield a very neutral position, which gives them a strong convening power to be able to, bring people together and, ask for certain things that can change society as well. Now, again, flowing from their convening power, they have a lot of networking abilities. And because usually civil society does not, is not set up with, let's say a political interest or a power interest or a private interest or a for-profit interest, they adhere to both sides of the coin, both the state actors and the non-state actors. And this gives them the ability to bring around the table, especially where there are issues of conflict or where there are situations where particularly government actors and private sector is not agreeing on what needs to be done. They can be a voice of influence and a voice of reasoning that is able to bring together and various sectors and sides to particular issues, bring them around the table to help them, see issues from a very neutral perspective. And so this networking ability of civil societies is a very, very important thing. And it really helps them achieve a lot of the objectives that they set out. Again, flowing from their networking abilities, what I've come to see is that in the data protection and privacy space, usually as a result of how their structures are set up and the systems that are in place, and a lot of the time, especially for the smaller ones, you would realize that they are not dealing with the usual challenges of bureaucracies or processes and all of that. They are able to mobilize a lot of resources, and these resources could be monetary resources, it could be human resources, it could be technical resources in order to facilitate and promote their shared objective and agenda. And so civil society, there's no doubt that this is a very critical factor, especially when you look at a continent like Africa and in a space like data protection, where, I don't know how well funded the data protection office is now, but you could very well see civil society organizations in your community that is probably more funded than you are. And so it's very important to build strategic partnerships and relationships with these organizations. And I'll share a bit more about that. Normally, because also of their shared, of their focus, right? So they would normally not look at broad spectrum of issues. Sometimes they may pick one particular issue that they are addressing. It could be privacy rights. It could just be raising awareness on privacy. It could just be data protection. It gives them the ability to focus their resources on these and build the necessary technical expertise and know-how on a particular subject, which is their objective, and so because of that, civil society organizations, especially in the data protection and privacy ecosystem, we're beginning to see that they tend to have a lot of resources available to them, and, without the bureaucracies and other things, they're able to pursue very exciting things that bring expertise and scholarship to the subject of data protection and rights as well. So these are some of the reasons why they are very important. Now, when it comes to their role in addressing privacy rights, I'm saying that you can divide these broadly into 4 segments. They have advocacy and influencing powers. As I have mentioned, I'll share a bit more about how they usually do that. They also have the strong abilities to raise awareness. They also have some level of enforcement capacities in either pushing for the enforcement of the laws or taking up public interest litigation issues to, force governments, authorities, regulators to do the right thing. And as I mentioned earlier, and I'll go into more detail, they have the research capacity. When it comes to advocating, because civil society has like a very focused focused objective. And we're seeing a lot of that in Africa currently. They really have the interest of society, rights, and then trust, especially trust. So what you tend to see in the space before even passage of laws, and then after the passage of laws, you would see civil society requesting governments and private sector to put in place processes and procedures that enable trust in the development and use of technologies. Some of these calls are usually what also leads to the development of the laws as well. And there are also situations where they're not just looking at the laws. Sometimes the laws have been drafted. However, provisions have been put in the law that is not necessarily in the ordinary man's interest in this space. And so because usually civil society organizations in the space are, especially around privacy and data protection, are focused around privacy rights, about individuals having better control and access to their information, they're able to call to order some of these provisions in the laws to make sure that it aligns towards guaranteeing the privacy rights of individuals in society. Normally, these individuals in our society are either, quiet or do not have the opportunity to speak when they even want to, or a lot of them don't even understand the issues in the space. And so you need a very strong civil society organization that has that technical expertise to be able to, support and advocate for the right policies, the right laws that can protect, and enshrine, or guarantee the kind of rights that we are looking at. Now, this is when it comes to raising awareness, this has been one of my exciting moments. So I remember when I was setting up the Data Protection Commission in Ghana, we worked with a lot of organizations, including civil society organizations. And we identify civil society organizations as a very critical stakeholder when it comes to awareness. And this is because of the area of focus of civil society. Usually they are working with people at the grassroots. They are the ones that are engaging with communities, with people, with groups of specialized. So you would see that even with the broad spectrum of civil society that I mentioned, the 8 groups that are there, they all have a critical role to play. I remember we worked with churches. We went to a few churches to raise awareness. They gave us their platforms. They used their platforms then to increase awareness around what privacy and data protection rights are. And these civil society organizations, like I mentioned, because of the areas they operate, they endear to the grassroots, they endear to the ordinary person. And so because they have the ear of the ordinary person, they are better able to influence and raise awareness and change attitudes, right, around certain things. And so they play a very, very, very critical role, especially in our communities. And I don't know whether, Stella, now you have resources when it comes to raising awareness, but I think the biggest challenge that data protection authorities face in Africa is lack of resources. And so usually when you have a very limited budget, where a small component of that, maybe less than even 10%, is going to be used for communications, and even a lesser amount in promoting rights, striking the right partnership with the development of even awareness materials, with the communication of what those rights are, with the constant education. And one of the things that I found them useful for, especially, is speaking the local languages, right? So in our communities where there are different languages, especially community groups, engaging with community groups can be a good way of leveraging on the gap that comes in when it comes to languages as well. So raising awareness for me is a very critical thing on rights. And I think that harnessing the support and the resources available to civil society, regulators and even private sector would be able to do a lot more when it comes to privacy rights as well. Then another critical area for me has to do with enforcement. So civil society typically looks at a number of areas when it comes to enforcement. Sometimes through collaborative approach, they push for more subtle enforcement. So maybe something has gone wrong in society and, the regulator has gone quiet and all of that. They can come out and talk about it and force the regulator to act. We've seen that happen in a number of situations, whether it's the police, whether it's the Attorney General's office, whether it is even the regulator's office itself. So they have a way of drawing attention to privacy rights violations and, calling for the enforcement of the laws as well. There are also situations where things go overboard. We don't see it a lot here, but we've seen it in countries like Kenya and other places like India, for instance, when it came to digital ID issues, where civil society, went to court and the courts, through the court's intervention, a call for order, a call for respect of rights, a call for enabling trust in civil society, in society, in the way regulators were working, in the way government is working, in the way private sector is doing its business, is also called to order. So they may not be the police necessarily, they may not be the Attorney General's office, they may not even be the regulator's office, but they have the convening power to influence the enforcement of data protection rights. And where that does not happen, they could even get into a public interest litigation. In societies like ours, where litigation can be very expensive, the ordinary person whose rights have been violated may not necessarily have the resources. And so issues like public interest litigation is one of the ways by pushing for the enforcement of rights as well. And last but not the least, we can talk about research. I mentioned having available resources. The Africa Digital Rights Hub have been fortunate to have been able to engage in a number of research work that has developed pieces which could be useful, especially in the enforcement of rights, in the recognition and protection of rights. We developed a code of practice for digital IDs, data protection code of practice for digital IDs in Africa, on engagement with, a number of people within the ecosystem, a number of stakeholders within the ecosystem. And these are some of the things that civil society has the liberty to. I don't think that, the governmental organizations or the privacy or the private sector, usually they're too busy minding their business, which is for profit, or minding their business, which is the regulator doing what it has to do, and they have their hands full. And so I think that, especially with academia in this space, civil society can be a very strong force for further research and enforcement to come up with tools and structures that can really enable growth and enable guarantee and respect of rights. And this is very important. We're talking about data protection, which is a very, simple and yet very complex subject. And it's complex relating to, different sectors. It's complex because when it comes to different sectors, you have to look at the issues quite differently. So engaging with civil society to push for maybe more research into particular issues, let's say issues around indigenous rights and protections, issues around the recognition and protection and enforcement of rights, even within smaller communities that do not necessarily speak English, which is where most of our laws and guides are developed, having research around how even as a country, you can strategically look at promoting and enforcing these rights. All these are issues that can be taken on by civil society, and it is going to enrich the ecosystem, is going to provide knowledge. They're a good resource, usually because of the technical expertise, as I mentioned, because of their societal influence, because of their convening power, and also because of the financial resources available to them. They're in a very good place to push and promote for a lot of these rights. And I will be ending on this by saying that civil society organizations play a critical role and are critical allies for the protection of privacy rights in Africa, and they must be given that due recognition. It can be done. I mean, when I was working as a regulator, like I mentioned, one of my strongest allies were civil society organizations, and I believe they helped me achieve a lot in most of these areas that I have mentioned. And so any regulator, any civil society organization should properly sit back and look at, it's not always about us, backing and saying the regulator is not doing this, the regulator is not doing that, but also recognizing that there is a deficiency and a gap in the regulatory space, even with all the resources. And even as civil society organizations, we should be asking ourselves these questions over and over and over again. How can we make our societies, our communities better? How do we meet the objectives for which we're set up? And I think that once we ask those questions, we then need to look at whatever structures and systems and relationships that we can build in order to make that happen. And I think that a lot of the time we have, a very, very important role to play, especially around recognition of rights. Because you are trusted more as a civil society organization, you are seen as an entity that does not have any acquired interest, you're seen as neutral, the public are likely to hear you, and you are likely to be able to have more resources to stand for the right thing to be done. You are also likely to have more resources to ensure that, areas where there are gaps, whether it's capacity building, whether it's research in a particular area or sector, you would look at these. And in all of these, I think that we should not look at the entire ecosystem in isolation. Every stakeholder in the space, including civil society organizations, have a role to play. It is important we recognize these roles and we carve out a path for them to play those roles in order to build the kind of resilient, trustworthy, and integrity ecosystem that we're looking at for Uganda and also for other African countries. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. I was still listening in to the presentation. Thank you so much for such an insightful, educative presentation, especially taking us back to who civil society is and the role that civil society plays and why that role is important, and the fact that government and civil society can actually work together to bring this role to the forefront and make sure that we build a resilient and integral data protection and privacy ecosystem in Africa. So we'll move on to the bit of of Q&A, and then I'll request for the ladies and gentlemen on the call, on the Zoom call, on the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for Teki to respond to. And Teki, there's a comment that this is a lecture to remember. And so, yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. And so as I wait for Q&A, for questions from the team, I'd like to know from your own experience dealing with civil society in Africa, and is civil society in Africa making an impact on the data protection and privacy space or ecosystem within this continent? You could share examples from your experience as well.
I think we're doing a lot, and not to speak for myself, there are a lot of organizations lawyers have all over. Even in Uganda, there are several, you know, some of which are sponsoring or partnering with you. There's several organizations, I think, in almost all the African countries that are really doing a lot when it comes to data protection. And I'm seeing them at the forefront of education and awareness on data protection and rights. I'm seeing them at the forefront of capacity building. I'm seeing them also at the forefront of enforcement and even research. So a lot is happening. And I think that because of their convening power, right, it's becoming a lot more easier to talk with them. You know, they lack the complexities that come with maybe private sector structure or the bureaucracy of public office and government agencies, you know, who may not be able to take certain decisions within the shortest possible time. And so they're very critical resource. And like I said, even when I was working from where you sit now, I realized that they were a stronger voice, sometimes even for resourcing the regulator, right? Because if you've passed the law and you don't resource the regulator enough, which was a challenge we were facing then, and I believe is still a challenge now, they become a strong voice for why did you set up a regulator? Why is it that the regulator only has this much budget? And so learning to, you know, build a very good relationship with them, I think is really a good way. And for Africa, I think that they're even more important because most of our institutions are not that strong. You know, they become a stronger voice when it comes to building institutional integrity, and then also pushing for the enforcement of rights. So yes, I think that they're doing a lot, and we need to get more people. I say that there's not enough, there's too much work that is still there, and we need a lot more civil society organizations to look at these issues and help us address it holistically.
Thank you so much, Teki. I'll just take us back to, on Monday, we actually had a webinar of privacy in Africa, and almost all the panelists agreed that Africa is playing catch up in terms of data protection and privacy, where other continents have, you know, moved on, especially the EU. Now, in your view, do you think the civil society in Africa is also playing catch up on privacy rights?
I mean, once everybody is playing, we are playing catch up. So I wouldn't say we're playing catch up personally, because, you know, we are in our own space. And I think that is something that we need to be very much aware of. And more recently, I was also sharing with somebody that it's about time that Africa understands who she is, right? Africa needs to know where she is, where she's standing, and where its focus is. Europe is doing what Europe wants to do, and it has a reason for it. So instead of playing catch up, which means that we are following after something, you know, which could also be problematic, because what are you catching up to? Do you know where Europe is going? Do you know what Europe's focus is? And even if you know what Europe's focus is, does it align with your purpose as Africa? So I think that, you know, because we're constantly saying that we're playing catch up, it's even a time for us to question and ask ourselves, what are we doing in this space, right? Yes, Europe has a very advanced data protection system. US equally, maybe China also has something different, but what is Africa's call? All these people have developed their laws and their ecosystems based on the community that they live in, based on their strategic focus as a society, based on their values as a society. And so we should also be asking ourselves questions around what are our values, what is our objective, what is our focus? And these can come down to countries. It can come down so that we can develop our own strategic, you know, focus. Then we don't hear that we are late. So even if somebody comes and they say that you are chasing after, you know, you're not chasing after. You're building out based on what is available to you, based on your resources, and then also based on your focus. You know, as somebody will say, you cut your cloth according to your size, you know, and so I think it's just a matter of us, you know, looking at our sizes, not your size, according to your cloth, you know, because you could be big, but you don't have a big enough cloth. So you need to strategize on how to cut your cloth to suit what is available to you, and then what also your size is. And I think that's how I'd like to look at it, rather to say that we're playing catch up. And honestly, if you look at what Uganda is doing, you look at what Kenya is doing, you look at what Nigeria is doing, you look at what Ghana is doing, South Africa, you know, there is a semblance of countries developing these laws, not blindly, but under the recognition that we have, you know, they have something unique. There's an importance to their country and to their society. What I think may be missing is that we need to start looking at it, you know, coherently together in a harmonized sound, because I think it gives us greater strength as Africa than as individual countries.
Thank you so much, Teki. Great response. And indeed, Africa is big. I don't know if we have enough cloth. Yes, and then the key things that you brought out about harmonization and collaboration among African countries also stood out very, very prominently in the discussions that we've been having throughout the week. So yeah, so I think it's time that we actually had great harmonization of frameworks and collaboration in Africa. And also, one of the things that we also discussed was the fact that Africa has enough resources to build a vibrant and integral data protection and privacy system in this continent. And I think that's the same thing that you were trying to let us know, that we actually on the right track, in the right timing, when we actually need this. And this is the right time for us. And so we shouldn't get worried that we are playing catch up. Thank you so much for those, can I say, encouraging words to us. And yeah, we are grateful. So we have one last question from the audience. And this was in response to how prepared regulators in Africa are, and or do they even have readily available resources? And so the attendee said that was a very good question to Stella. So Stella, if I may bring you on board to jump on here, do we even have readily available resources to see successful implementations and advocacy of data protection and privacy in Uganda? Stella, over to you.
I know Teki knows the answer to that question.
Yes.
No, we are not resourced adequately. Like all organizations, especially now that we have COVID, every time you request for a budget, they will tell you, but you know, we have COVID priorities. However, I think the Personal Data Protection Office is in a privileged position, because having been set up within an already existing organization, we've been able to still do what we can do within the budget of that existing organization. I believe that if that were not the case, most likely the setup of this office would have even taken much longer. Teki, you know that we do have data protection commissions that took even 5 years after the passing of the law to start actually operating. So I'm grateful for where Uganda is. A lot needs to be done. You've emphasized the role of civil society. We have someone here called Chris. I believe he works with Unwanted Witness. It's one of those organizations that keep us on our toes, but has also raised a lot of awareness. So we work a lot with them. They've been very pivotal this year. No, last year, I think. Last year, you know, we've just crossed the year. We hosted with them the 3rd Privacy Symposium. So you can imagine, even as we're going through the legislative processes, they were already on their toes and creating awareness. So civil society is very, very key. On, I think I've really answered to the issue of resources. We acknowledge that creating awareness is a big challenge for us. We are lucky that as an organization within NITA, we use a lot of technology. So for instance, for this Data Privacy Week, we've had a very exciting week. We've had hundreds of participants actually. I think on average, at least we've had about either 80 to 100. There's a webinar where we even had 192 people on top of live streaming. So technology helps, but we acknowledge that it will only cover maybe 1 or 2, 3 million, 5 million people who have access to smartphones. We are making use of radio, TV. This morning, my colleague was on TV. The other day, I was on Spectrum, which is one of our most popular programs on radio. We are taking advantage of those opportunities to create awareness. Within government, there's a rule that requires broadcasters to provide space for government programs to speak about, you know, what they are doing. And we are taking advantage of some of those spaces to be able to speak. So those are some of the ways we are trying to still do what we can within the very limited resources that we have. Is it an easy task? No. Is the work done? No. So there's a lot of work that we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella, for that response. And we have 1 minute to go. I'd like to invite our speaker back, Teki, to give us your final remarks and what you think the future is for data protection and privacy in Africa as a civil society organization, but where you also think we should look to and the things that we should do. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Stella. Thank you to the Personal Data Protection Office for having me. As final remarks, I just want to say that we are in a very good place. We shouldn't shoot ourselves down too much. I think, you know, and that's because every opportunity, every challenge that we see is an opportunity. And so it gives us an opportunity to learn from those that are ahead of us. It gives us an opportunity to learn from the mistakes of those that are ahead of us. And by that, I'm saying we should look at other jurisdictions. It's fine to look at Europe. It's fine to look at the Americas. It's fine to even look at our own colleagues within Africa and to learn from it. but we should not forget our own unique positioning. And I think this is going for, whether it's for civil society or the regulators or even the continent at large, it's very important. And we should start asking ourselves, the question is, who am I? You know, who am I as an organization? What am I here for? What is my value proposition? Where can I become most useful? And I think that once, these are very basic questions that we deal with when we are at key milestones in our lives. And I think that we should continue to ask those questions. What do I have, you know, available? What do I, and I usually say, what do you have in your hand, right? So yes, you may not have a lot of resources by way of financial resources, but you may have people there, you may have a community, you may have a community of state and non-state actors. And so for a regulator, you may not have all the resources available to you, but how do you make use of what you have, which will be the academia, which will be the media, which will be the civil society organizations. It could also even be other governmental agencies, you know, the police, the Attorney General's office, Parliament. What do you have available, and how? And so the question there should be, how do we then utilize those resources to achieve the best that we can? But let's not forget that, you know, data protection and privacy is important. And the recognition, you know, at the base of it is not about putting in place processes. It's not about putting in place laws. At the base of it is enforcement and recognition of all these laws. So if we develop all these beautiful laws and we put it on the shelf and we don't enforce, you know, we are weakening the ability to make sure that we build a resilient society, which in turn also affects the grander vision that our governments normally have for our countries, i.e. use ICT as an accelerator tool for development, for economic development, you know, because you're not bringing, you're taking away certainty, you're taking away trust, and you make it more difficult for people to use these tools to facilitate development and growth in their own ways. So it is a very important sector. We should continue to push for the resources to be made available, but we shouldn't forget to, you know, use what we have in our hands.
Thank you so much, Teki, for those closing remarks. And as you were giving the closing remarks, I was actually making mental notes of apply this to personal life. Yeah, because it's really, we need to know who we are as Africa, as a continent, but also as regulators, as governments, and ultimately as individuals. We've been so honored to have you, Teki, here for your insightful presentation. We'll come back knocking on your door. Be sure about that for more and these presentations. Thank you so much, and may you be blessed. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me invite Stella back for a brief closing remark as well, just to give us a goodbye for the day. Stella.
Thank you so much, Teki, for honoring our invitation. I'm sure you've seen the comments. Someone was saying this is a good presentation, how I wish we get them regularly. Insightful presentation, absolutely enriching, excellent presentation, insightful and illuminating presentations. I've never seen so much English used, you know, in 1 hour. So I guess that tells you the quality of the presentation that you've made. As an office, we are here to provide this information. We are here to create awareness. We are here to, you know, start these conversations and ensure that they continue. Thank you so much for your time and for the knowledge you've shared with us. I want to thank our participants, your excellent participants. Please continue to follow the work that we do. Please follow us on our social media handles, because that's where we will be communicating with you on the progress that we are making. Teki, you're welcome to Uganda. Now that we are fully open, we look forward to seeing you and
I'll
to
be
working.
coming sooner than later. So
fantastic. Thank you all, and thank you for attending this webinar.
Thank you very much, Stella. Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of our 4th webinar this week. So we hope to see you tomorrow at our e-conference. Use the same link to join us. And it's a goodbye from us, and God bless you. Bye-bye.